Hello everybody, welcome to Totally Tabled. My name is Shaggy, and today I'm doing a sponsored preview for the second edition of Defenders of the Wild, as well as for its new expansion, Critter Moon. Defenders of the Wild is a cooperative board game for 1 to 4 players from publisher Outlandish Games, who have paid me to make this video. They're running a Kickstarter campaign for the second edition of Defenders of the Wild and the Critter Moon expansion beginning on March 3rd. I'll provide a link in the description below. A year and a half ago, I made a sponsored tutorial for the first edition of Defenders of the Wild where I taught all the rules for the game. This second edition dramatically streamlines those rules, removing many of the contingencies and exceptions. The result is a game that is easier for new players to learn, but also offers increased depth and a shorter game length. Now, as you can see, I already set up for a 2-player game. You may or may not be able to notice some changes immediately. First, the art and visual design has been updated on many of the components in order to improve their look and functionality. Second, check out these extra thick perimeter pieces. They keep the map more secure, and their size is a good reminder that the perimeter counts as a wall. Speaking of thick, the machine core has completely changed. It is now this super thick single tile here in the middle of the board. It starts with a new furnace token on top. I'll talk about this more later. It also starts with a mech token that cannot be destroyed, and it indicates the machine direction, either to the right or the left. This replaces that large piece of cardboard from the first edition. To win the game, players must now infiltrate this new machine core, first by building all their camps as usual, but then moving through the core's gate, which is right there. When a player enters the core, they leave the game, and once everyone has left, all players win. Players now lose in one of 2 ways. First, if 2 defenders of the same habitat are killed, just like before. But now you can also lose if the supply of machine components is not enough to resolve an action on the machine turn. Machine components include these 3 new wooden factory markers, the mechs, the walls, and the pollution tokens. The quantities of these components have been calibrated to ensure that games will stay tense. Every pollution you clear, mech you destroy, and factory you rewild will be necessary for victory. The way factories work in the second edition is a really big change. I'll speak on that more later. But you now have this factory deck, in addition to the machine deck. When you build a factory, you'll flip over one of those factory cards and it will do a little something. Again, I'll show that off in just a little bit. The machine card effects have been tweaked and streamlined, and you can adjust the deck to go from a beginner difficulty level to extreme difficulty levels appropriate only for the most skilled players. The abilities on the defender cards have also been tweaked and revised from the first edition. This is mostly in order to lean into the asymmetrical playstyles of the 4 different factions. Half of your deck will be different based on the organizer you choose. In the base game, each faction has 2 organizers to choose from, and the Critter Moon expansion will add 8 more organizers, 2 per faction. I've decided to play with Verodin the Rocketeer and Darksa the Shadow Witch, both from the expansion. Other than that, setup is pretty similar to the first edition. You still randomize the map hexes, so you have a unique map every time you play. Oh yeah, and check out these breach markers. They now fit on top of the wall pieces. That's a nice touch. Okay, let's start playing for a little bit so I can show you how the gameplay has changed. Just like before, the game starts with an organize phase, where players are going to take their hand of cards and pick one to play. And it's going to start face down. And then once everyone has picked one, you'll reveal simultaneously. This phase of the game is played without communication. This is in order to simulate that even though the animals from the factions are standing in solidarity against the machines, ancient distrusts and bitter disagreements between the factions still remain. However, once all players have selected their cards and revealed simultaneously, you can then discuss what you want to do with your cards. We're then going to go to the action phase where each player is going to get to take a turn. The Sect player here has the first player marker, so they'll go first. And as you can see, because of the initial in the lower right-hand corner of the card, this is a new expansion card that is in the deck because of our organizer. This is the Fireworks Festival, and it says that when we reveal the card, which is right now, all players gain rockets. So we have our items here, and all players can gain a rocket. The Coven player has also played a card from the expansion. This is Reign of Rust that also has a reveal condition. It says to destroy any mech and add 1 pollution to the toxic track. Well, that's super handy. I think they'll remove this mech. And the toxic track is just this new thing that's on one of the pieces of the perimeter. We no longer have toxic sites like we did in the first edition. The rules for how pollution spreads have been streamlined. I'll show this off in more detail in just a minute, but various effects will have us adding pollution to that toxic site track. One way is if there's ever pollution that we need to add to the exterior of the board, then it will go onto that track instead. And when it fills up, then it will then get dumped out from the furnace. Again, I'll show that in action in just a little bit. Okay, so we would now take actions. I have 2 action points, as you can see on my card. Before I do anything, I think I'll use my rocket. I can use it to destroy a mech or to breach a wall. Has to be in my location, and that doesn't take an action, and we don't have to roll the die when we do it. So let's just use our rocket, kill this mech. We're gonna, boom, get a support, just as always. And in fact, the Sect player should have gotten a support because they destroyed a mech using that ability. You still get the support. Now for my first action, I'll get rid of this pollution. That also gives me a support. I'm now in position to build a camp. There's already a camp here, so we got to go somewhere else. So for my second action, I think I'll just move right there. Now that their turn is over, we draw a machine card, just as you would before. And here we have the pollution card, which says to spread pollution from the furnace. The furnace now spreads 6 pollution, 1 to each adjacent hex. Yeah, it's now brutal. Keep in mind that each hex can only hold at most 3 pollution tokens. If you were going to put a 4th down, so let's say it was like this, instead you would just move outward. Just out in a straight line from the furnace. And like I said, if that causes you to put a pollution out here on the perimeter, it would instead go onto the pollution track, or rather the toxic track, that's what it's called. Okay, that's how you resolve the pollution card. We now have 3 actions that we can spend over here. Again, might as well use the rocket. We can now build a camp, so again, let's move. Movement works the same way as it did in the first edition, so because of our habitat of the card that we played, we could actually move over there for 1 move. We could even move there, but let's just move right here. And then for our second action, we'll build a camp. This resets. And now as a slight difference, anytime you build a camp, you just get to draw 2 cards into your hand. Once again, the rules have just been streamlined, easier to learn. We have 1 more action, so we'll do another move. Once again, we can treat this whole thing as sort of like 1 space because that's her preferred habitat. Movement rules are exactly the same. There we go, action's done. We'll draw another machine card. And this time we have mechs. The way this card now works is first, our 2 engines are going to spawn a mech each. We'll look to see what direction. So we started on the right. So that one's spawning a mech that way. And this one's spawning a mech that way. Again, it's hard to see in the overhead camera, but you can see on one side you have the 1 gear, on the other side you have the 2 gear. That's just designating right side or left side. Now that we've deployed those mechs, the mechs are going to pursue. So we'll first look at the active player, and anything that is adjacent to our active player, they would move in. Right now we don't have that, but let's say that was right there, then this mech would move in. If the mechs aren't adjacent, they won't move. Now you could also have a situation like that, where you have 2 that are adjacent, both will move in. But if you had a situation like that, only one of those would move in, right? If you have multiple mechs in one hex, only one will move. You would then go around the table and the mechs would then move towards all the other players. So in this case, if anything was adjacent to our Sect player, they would move, but again, not the case, so that's it. There we go, that was the end of the round. So now we'd go back to the beginning. Each player would pick a card. Once again, in silence. Then we reveal. And then we get to go again. We have a reveal here, so another player gets to get a potion. So boom, we get a potion. That'll let us heal or clear pollution in our location. That's going to be very handy. Now here we have another card from the expansion. This is Rocket Ride. It says ongoing, we can use a rocket to relocate to any location, but then we'll have to take 1 damage. That's an incredibly fun and thematic card. We don't have any rockets, unfortunately, so I think we're just going to have to do our first action as a move. And because of our terrain, we can slide through here and then move up here. I now want to build my camp, right? Going to build our camp right here. But here's another difference with the 2nd edition. When you take an action, you have to roll for damage if mechs are in your location or if they are adjacent. We no longer have a distinction between mechs and snipers. Right now, we just have mechs, and these guys are going to take ranged attacks on us. So before we even place our camp, we have to roll. Now for the ranged action, that counts as a hit. So we're going to have to take some damage, and we have these new sort of damage markers right here. For a ranged action, that would not count as a hit. That only matters in melee. So if we were melee and we roll that, we would take 2 damage. But we only take those for ranged. And you only roll the die once, even though we have 2 mechs that are within range. It doesn't matter how many mechs are attacking you, you only roll the die once. If we had taken an action like that, then we would just roll the melee and we would ignore the ranged. So that alone adds a ton more danger into this world. Remember, if you ever have to take your 4th damage, then that character dies. You take a random card from your hand, or if you don't have a hand, from the top of your deck, you put it over here in the graveyard. And if you ever have 2 defender cards from the same habitat, then that's the end of the game. That's a way you can lose. So we got hit, but we did manage to build our camp. We reset that. We draw 2 cards. And now I want to talk about another aspect of the expansion. That is something called critter tokens. Now you can choose whether you want to play with this or not. And in fact, you could play with this even without using organizers from the expansion. You can use this with base game organizers. What we do is we have this extra thick token here in the middle of our board. We start the game with it exhausted, but once we build a camp, we can unexhaust it. And in fact, when we built a camp over here, we would have been able to unexhaust as well. And this kind of works as another item almost. You can see here we have a player aid that tells us exactly what we can do. We can flip this back over anytime on our turn in order to perform the action. So it's just another fun way that each of the factions can be even further differentiated. For the beetle here, we can move any mech to an adjacent location. I might actually want to do that right now. So let's flip that over. And let's move this guy over in with us. Now I don't have to move over to destroy it. The dragonfly is similar. It would let us move all the pollution in one location to an adjacent location. There's also the ant, where any one player can exchange an item for a different item. And the honeybee, where any one player can relocate to an adjacent location without mechs. And anytime we build a camp, we can reactivate that. So that's just a fun little extra ability that the factions can have. Again, that's in the expansion. I think I have one more action, so I'm going to destroy that mech. Of course, we have to roll. Okay, just taking 1 damage. Again, I was rolling for melee in this case, so that would have caused 2. But boom, we got him. We get a support. And now we draw a machine card. And we have the third type, construction. The first thing we do with construction is advance each of the engines twice. Again, we're going to look at the direction, so they're heading to the right. This is all just like the first edition. They're going to move twice in that direction, laying down walls. There's an important rules change in the second edition that happens when the machines or the engines get stuck. So let's say we go on and then at a future time we draw this construction again. Well, this engine now is stuck here against this wall. So what you're going to do is you're going to remove it and place a wall down. It's then going to move back and find an intersection where there are 2 wall pieces and 1 that's empty. And it's going to take that and then face the other way. And that would be its first placement. And then its second placement, it would just go forward as normal. So that's a very streamlined and easier way of dealing with the engines when they get stuck. Now, the second part of construction is that it's going to build a factory in all empty enclosures. So an enclosure is just a hex that is completely surrounded by walls. Now, this is done very different in the second edition. So let's say, again, this is our hypothetical future here, and now we have an enclosure. It's completely surrounded by walls because the central core is considered a wall. Again, also the perimeter would be considered a wall. So we're going to take one of these, place it in there to designate that as a factory. We're going to then move the furnace token on top of that factory. And it fits just right on there. Again, that might be hard to see in the overhead camera, but you can just like stack it right on top of there. Any pollution tokens that were in the location are going to go to the toxic track. And you're going to deploy a mech onto the location. Now in the future, when we draw a pollution card, it'll spread from the furnace here. And the next time a factory is built, the furnace will move there, and then it'll start spreading from there. And if the toxic track is ever filled up, then you take all 6 of those pollution and you spread it from the furnace, wherever it is. Again, same way, 1 in each adjacent location. And now there's even an additional step where we draw a factory card and resolve it. In this case, we got Engine Depot. So you can see here, in addition to moving the furnace and the pollution to the toxic track and deploying the mech, we now have an extra step, which is advance each engine once. Instead of that, we could have gotten the chemical plant, which says to add 3 pollution from the supply to the toxic track. Or we could have gotten the surveillance outpost, which says that each player needs to exhaust a defender. Or lastly, we could get the armory, where we need to deploy 2 mechs to the enclosure rather than just 1. Now, there's something I want to point out here, and that is that, unlike in the first edition, these walls stay out on the board permanently. So the number of wall pieces is like a ticking clock. You are rushing to complete your goals and win the game before you run out of those wall pieces. The last machine card that we need to talk about is very simple. It's just Reboot. And all you do is move the direction that the machines will travel just by moving that mech. And I think I mentioned this, but you cannot destroy that mech. In fact, you can't move onto this machine core. But that still counts as a mech. So if we were to try to remove this pollution right here, that mech would be adjacent to us, so we would have to roll for damage. And there you go, we would get hit. So anytime you're taking an action adjacent to the machine core, you're going to roll for damage. But it's only ranged damage. There's only one change left to talk about, and that is rewilding factories. So let's say the Coven player comes over here. They'd have to breach the wall, of course. They come in and they take a rewild action. Obviously, they'd have to roll because there are mechs there. They would take a damage. You remove the factory token, and if the furnace is there, you put it back onto the machine core. You take a rewild token, and you're going to look at the back because you get a reward. You either get the item that's shown on the back, so we could get this map, or instead you can take a defender card and add it to your hand. You have the choice. And then you just place that right there in the spot. Once a location's been rewilded, it cannot have another factory there. And there you have it. That's pretty much all the new features of the second edition, along with the additions from the expansion Critter Moon. Oh, there is actually one other thing. There is this cool little pocket guidebook that's going to be added to the second edition. This is just a little booklet that goes over the history of the war against the machines. There's sort of a lot of world building in here. You can see maps, and there's even poems and stories. So if you really want to immerse yourself in this world, that's going to be a nice addition. If any of this looks interesting, please click on the link in the description to go to the Kickstarter page. Again, the campaign is starting on March 3rd. But there you have it. That's all for me. I'd like to thank all the financial supporters of Totally Tabled, including the totally radical Hextra, John Kohler, Scott Myers, and Jay Satterwhite, as well as the totally bodacious Vaqueeth. If you're interested in becoming a member, you can join on YouTube or my Patreon at www.patreon.com/totallytabled. You'll gain access to my new exclusive podcast, Table Talk, as well as unboxing videos and whatever extra stuff I come up with. As always, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.